The Bank of England takes a sledgehammer to the nutty problem of Brexit, cutting interest rates to an historic low and throwing a further £170 billion at Britain's fragile economy.
Good news or bad news?
Good news.
You work all your life to get a pension, then you suddenly find you haven't got one.
Good evening. The Bank of England has thrown virtually everything it's got at the economy, creating £60 billion of new money and providing £100 billion to banks to force them to pass on the rock-bottom interest rate to householders and businesses. In short, the governor left no one in any doubt about how worried he is about the state of the economy after the Brexit vote. Now, with almost all the bank's options exhausted, it's over to the government. And the Chancellor today vowed he'd take any necessary steps to restore economic confidence.
Also tonight, it's been an honour. His closest companion becomes the Companion of Honour. George Osborne, one of a host of MPs, ministers and government advisers rewarded in David Cameron's controversial resignation honours list, just published. Police investigating a mass stabbing which left one woman dead and 5 injured on the streets of London say there's no evidence it's a terror attack.
I emphasise that so far we have found no evidence of radicalisation that would suggest that the man in our custody is in any way motivated by terrorism.
And rocking the boat. We try to talk to BHS boss Philip Green as he relaxes on his multi-million-pound yacht about the future for redundant workers and the company's pension black hole.
And later tonight, we'll be ploughing our own furrow with farmers who voted for and against Brexit. Some see EU withdrawal as a chance to head for the sunlit uplands of a more environmentally friendly subsidy system. Others see storm clouds on the horizon.
The direct payments, I'm quite convinced, will end. They may be a short term of a transition, but the long term, no, they've gone.
Well, the Bank of England's chief economist said last month he didn't mind being accused of taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut as long as it was delivered promptly. Today it was, as the governor did all he could to stop Britain slipping into recession. Interest rates are now at a record low and tens of billions of pounds are being pumped into the economy. The moves came as the bank's quarterly inflation report warned that the Brexit vote would slam the brakes on economic growth, triggering rising unemployment and falling house prices. Our business correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, has this.
The Bank of England reckons taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut is better than relying on a miniature rock hammer to tunnel out of prison. And that's exactly what they've done today. A cut in interest rates to a historic new low, £60 billion of quantitative easing, £10 billion of corporate bonds, and £100 billion of further credit easing for banks. And it was a big day for Mark Carney, a nervous bite of the lip before delivering his £170 billion plan to rescue the economy.
Today's announcement is the latest element of the bank's joined-up policy response to the referendum, a plan that was based on months of extensive analysis of the risks, detailed planning and appropriate public communications. A plan that delivered a broad range of contingency measures to contain the immediate impact on the financial system of the result of the referendum.
What the Bank of England is saying today is that it is more worried about the impact on jobs, the impact on growth in the economy, than it is on inflation in the future. And it's not hanging about. So it's really hit us with sort of all 4 barrels, if you like, today. And I think the first rate move since March 2009, it's clearly a massive day in UK economics.
In 2009, the Bank of England was forced to take emergency measures, cutting interest rates to unprecedented levels. As the years went on, everyone expected there to be a rate rise, but the UK economy was slow to recover. For more than 7 years, rates have been kept on hold. But now, the Bank of England, post-Brexit, has been forced to take action. As the bank tries to manoeuvre the economy into a better position, there are obvious losers, most notably savers and pensioners. These bowls players in Oxford say they're fed up.
Well, I think it's unfair because you work all your life to get a pension, then you suddenly find you haven't got one. or if you have, it's very small.
For me personally, bad news, and for everybody that relies on investment savings to add on to their pension in particularly.
Pensions experts warn this could affect not just the retired, but anyone saving for their future.
I mean, it's an absolute disaster for savers, really. We're talking about a lost decade when you've got next to nothing on your cash, and it's looking like that's going to be the case right up into 2020. So really bad news if you've got any cash in the bank from the Bank of England today.
The bank says the vote to leave the EU could cost the British economy around £45 billion in the next 3 years and around 250,000 jobs. The GDP forecast has been slashed from 2.3% next year to just 0.8%. However, like so many weather forecasts, the winds have also changed for the bank's predictions of a recession. Now it seems, thanks to today's programmes, predictions of negative growth have blown away. Good news too for the young or the indebted. Money just became cheaper and for a lot longer.
Especially as a young person, it's really difficult now. And as I said, I'm just hoping that, things would get better, in the near future.
Rate cut, good news or bad news?
Good news.
Good news for your generation?
Yes, yeah. Old people do owe it to the new generation. I think the rising house prices are an example of intergenerational theft.
Yeah, it's getting quite expensive. And I think I'll advise anyone who can get on the ladder now to get on before it becomes quite ridiculous.
Today's measures offer a sunny outlook for consumers. It lays down a marker for the Chancellor to roll out his stimulus plans and showcases Mr. Carney as the hero of the hour. But the truth is, no one quite knows whether such extreme economic policies will come close to keeping Britain afloat or create more distortions down the line.
And Helia is with me now. Helia, what to make of it all?
Well, look, this is the second biggest action that the Bank of England has ever taken, and it's a really historic day. But the governor was very keen to stress that this should trickle down to everyone in the economy. He really pointed out that banks have no excuse not to pass on these rates to their customers. For those at home, that means availability of credit. It also means cheaper rates through this more difficult economic cycle. And for banks, it means offering those rates without hurting their profits. And I guess for Mr. Carney, it's finally a chance, after 3 years of having his forward guidance policies really criticised, he was able to flex his muscles as the person that comes in and actually rescues the day. I think the question is, what do they do now? What does the government do now? I asked the governor earlier when I spoke to him, had the bank got it wrong when they predicted a recession, or was the action they did today actually staving off that eventuality?
There's no question. You've seen the scale of the action that we've taken. This makes a difference. It makes a difference, and it
makes the difference between recession and not recession?
Look, you can draw your own conclusions. We have growth, very modest growth in the second half of this year. And monetary policy does take time to work through.
Even you know there's limits to what monetary policy can achieve, and you've outlined that today. Do you think, you said the challenge needs to be dealt through structural measures? Does that mean today you're saying the bank's done its bit? Over to you, Chancellor.
Well, the biggest issues are structural. New relationship with Europe, new relationship with the rest of the world, the government's productivity plan that it's developing. Those will make the biggest difference to the long-term prosperity of this country. Monetary policy just helps with the ups and downs and smoothing things out. It's foundational, but it doesn't determine prosperity. But monetary policy can act quickly. It can act comprehensively. It can act in a way that helps with that adjustment to those new levels. Decisions on fiscal policy and decisions on structural policy take longer.
Is that the big job, though? This is a huge stimulus package today, but is the big job really for the Chancellor to do?
Well, the big jobs, the big determinants of our prosperity, of wages, of ultimately house prices, of activity in this economy, our export competitiveness, absolutely will be determined by government policy. It does not follow, though, that monetary policy shouldn't act when it can act. Look, the Chancellor and I have been in close contact, met numerous times since his appointment. He made clear in his letter today that he and the government would take all necessary steps to support economic activity and confidence. Again, but government operates on a different time frame.
The bank is just better placed to act quickly.
We have instruments that can act more rapidly, and the people rightly expect us to use them.
What about for savers? This is the big topic. After 7 years of emergency level interest rates, and we've experienced growth in those years, are you saying to savers, you might as well give up? You don't need to save anymore. You're never going to earn a return on any of this money.
Well,
you're going to have low interest rates for ages now.
The judgment we have to make for the economy as a whole is what's the right stance of policy to support overall growth, to minimize unemployment in the context of keeping inflation.
Even if it punishes savers?
We work for the economy as a whole. The economy as a whole. Look, I have tremendous sympathy for the situation of savers. They've done the right thing. They've set money aside. They're not earning the returns they would have seen in the past.
And what's your message to them? Be patient. Think of the wider economy.
Well, I think we do have to think of the wider economy. You think of as savers, your children, your grandchildren. Are they going to be employed? What type of job are they going to have? What are their prospects? Would we be in a better position if we had higher interest rates and we had a deep recession? No. Clearly, as a whole, we would not.
But if you're talking about the wider economy as a whole, you've launched a very big stimulus package with a lot of QE, but there's a lot of debate about what QE actually achieves. It inflates asset prices, makes house prices bigger, it makes shares worth more. It's not clear that that trickles down to the rest of the economy, given the Brexit vote has uncovered how many people in Britain feel like they've been left behind. Isn't there a risk that more QE is just going to exacerbate that feeling of wealth disparity?
We thought long and hard about how to make sure this stimulus reaches through the financial system to the real economy. So if you're a business person and you have a viable business idea, you can get credit. If you're a young family and you would have qualified for a mortgage 2 months ago, that you can still qualify and get that mortgage, and you can get that mortgage at a more competitive price today in order to buy that first flat or that first home. That's what we're doing. We're making sure that the system continues to work on the high street. This is not about the city. This is about reaching through the financial system to the real economy. That's why we acted on multiple fronts. That's why we're buying corporate bonds in a way that reaches through to the businesses that have, not any business, sorry, Helia, not any business, but businesses that have material activity in the UK, businesses that invest in this country, businesses that hire our fellow citizens. So that is what we're doing to make a difference, to have stimulus that hits not just the high street, but across the entire economy.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Helia Ebrahimi talking to the Bank of England governor. Well, with me now is Gerard Lyons, who's co-founder of Economists for Brexit and chief economic advisor to Boris Johnson during his time as Mayor of London, and Ray Newton-Smith, the CBI's Director of Economics. Gerard Lyons first. The fact that the Bank of England did more than expected just shows how bleak the economic outlook is for Britain, doesn't it?
No, it shows that there's near-term challenges. Basically, if one looks at the outlook for the UK, it depends on the interaction between the economic fundamentals, policy and confidence. There's no doubt that confidence has taken a big knock in the last 6 weeks, and therefore how the economy performs in the very near term is really going to be heavily influenced not only by confidence but also by the policy measures.
When you talk about near-term challenges, I mean, let's be clear what that means. That means the biggest cut to growth forecasts since the Bank of England started forecasts.
Yeah, while I agree with most of what the Bank of England did today, I do think their growth forecast over the next year and a half is probably too weak. Before the referendum, I did say that Brexit would be positive for the economy. I still think it will be. But at the same time, I did say that Brexit, or voting for no, would lead to an economic shock, and the Treasury Select Committee quoted me in their report earlier this year. So
let me put that to Ray Newton-Smith. Are you as gloomy as the bank?
I think what we've seen today is the bank has taken some welcome measures to shore up business and consumer confidence, and that's what we need to see now. But I think, and so businesses will welcome this, but for the majority of businesses, the most important priority at the moment is for us to have clarity about what will be our trading relationship with Europe, how we will have access to talent and skills from Europe and from the rest of the world.
So the government's got to get a move on.
Yeah, we need to see a clear timetable from government. But importantly, if I'm a producer, a car producer in the northeast of England, I want to know what sort of tariffs I'm going to face if I'm moving goods and services across borders in 5 to 10 years' time, if I'm going to be investing now. So we need clarity on where we're going forward.
And that's the point, isn't it? That clarity is going to be a very long time coming. And so those near-term challenges, as you put it, are going to be, well, perhaps medium-term.
No, well, I don't think so. It's true that today's actions, while they're very positive, I think will be good for the economy in the near term, they should be seen in the context of a number of things. First, in the last 6 weeks, we've seen the pound fall, which is good. Also, we've seen financial markets...
Depends which side, where you're sitting.
Well, it is good for the economy because inflation is not a near-term problem. And what we've also seen in the last 6 weeks is clarity about the fact that this is not like 07 and 08, when we had a financial crisis. But also today we've had the Bank of England. The next stage is the government with the autumn statement. We need to see measures aimed at the middle income, people who've been squeezed. We need to see measures aimed at boosting infrastructure. And basically, I think we need to see an end to austerity. So in the autumn statement, that will be the next stage of a process. And when you add it all together, today's monetary policy, the fiscal policy, and also the last 6 weeks, I think people should then start to be reassured. The worst thing is if we talk to ourselves into a self-feeding downturn.
OK, let me put that end to austerity. So it's over to the government now, is it, Rain?
Well, I think it's right that a lot of the tools that are at the government's disposal do rest in the autumn statement, and that we need to see a focus there on research and development, on encouraging investment, and all these.
But an end to austerity, would you agree with that?
Well, I think it's really about getting a focus on the long-term productivity in our economy, because we're facing a long-term challenge to our whole relationship with Europe, our relationship to all the countries through which we have trading agreements through being a member of the European Union. That has an impact on our long-term growth prospects, which is what the governor was talking about in the press conference today. And that's why we need to see government policy doing what it can to support, and businesses as well need that clarity so they can invest for the future.
What do you mean by an end to austerity? I mean, be specific now. Three measures that you want the Chancellor to introduce.
Right, one size doesn't fit all. So we need to have a global policy for the UK economy about positioning ourselves in the changing, growing global economy. In terms of specific measures, earlier cuts in corporation tax, a commitment to cut income tax or raise allowances sooner, and more importantly, borrowing for infrastructure.
So investing in housing,
housing, the whole supply side of the economy. Really, when one looks at it, the economy needs more innovation, which is longer term, more investment by the private sector, which today's measures from the Bank of England are half aimed at encouraging, and more infrastructure spending. We have all that, and it will be good.
Let me just put that to... Do you agree with those three measures?
So I think one of the things we absolutely do need to see is investment in our infrastructure and some of the critical decisions made by government. They need to show that the UK is open for business. And what would help with that is having a decision on aviation capacity in the southeast. How are we going to move our goods and services from the UK to the rest of the world? We really need to get on and make a decision on some of these important measures.
Rain Newton-Smith, Gerard Lyons, thank you very much for joining me. Jackie.
Now, just over an hour ago, the government has published David Cameron's controversial resignation honours list. The list names 13 new peers, including Mr Cameron's former Chief of Staff and the Conservative Party Treasurer, and 46 other honours for a range of ministers, MPs, advisers, allies and Downing Street insiders. Our political correspondent Michael Crick is in Cardiff tonight. We'll be hearing from him in a moment about the Labour leadership hustings there. But first, Michael, this list has already been widely leaked.
Well, parts of it, Jackie, and it's true that The knighthoods that were in the Sunday Times leak and predicted will have been achieved now by Oliver Letwin, Patrick McLaughlin, the new Conservative chairman, and Craig Oliver, David Cameron's former press secretary, as well as a damehood for the former cabinet minister Caroline Spellman. But what's interesting is that several names on the Sunday Times leak list haven't got the honours that they were tipped for. There are not knighthoods for Philip Hammond, the new Chancellor, Michael Fallon, the Defence Secretary, David Lidington, the leader of the House of Commons, or Ian Taylor, the Conservative donor. One wonders whether Theresa May intervened and decided it wouldn't be diplomatic for them to have honours at this stage. Much more interesting, though, I think, is the new peerage list, which wasn't leaked. There's been no scrutiny over that, and it's been put together amid total secrecy. It not only includes the Chief of Staff to David Cameron, Ed Llewellyn, as you say, but interestingly, as well as the 13 Conservative peers, one Labour peer, Shami Chakrabarti, even though last summer Jeremy Corbyn pledged in the then leadership campaign he wouldn't be appointing any new Labour peers. And interestingly too, it's going to be controversial this, because Shami Chakrabarti was almost certainly talking about getting this peerage in liaison with Corbyn's office at the same time that she would have been chairing Labour's inquiry into anti-Semitism. And there'll be those who wonder whether this peerage was perhaps a bit of a reward.
Michael Crick, thanks very much. We'll talk to you later. Kathy.
Thanks, Jackie. Now, it was little more than 12 hours since the Metropolitan Police had been showing off its beefed-up provision of specially trained firearms officers ready to respond to any terrorist threat in the capital. So there was predictable alarm when a man with a knife killed one woman and wounded 5 other people in a random attack on the streets of central London last night. But the suspect, who was tasered by police, turned out to be a 19-year-old Norwegian of Somali origin, named tonight as Zakaria Bulhan, who has mental health issues. Our senior Home Affairs correspondent Simon Israel reports on the incident and its aftermath.
Last night's attack at first appeared to bear the hallmarks of terrorism. A man with a knife rampaging down a street in central London, stabbing at random tourists returning to their hotels. It brought the country's National Coordinator for Counter-Terrorism out in the early hours to indicate mental health was a key factor, but not the only one.
We should keep an open mind regarding motive, and consequently, terrorism as a motivation remains but one line of inquiry for us to explore.
Through the night, there were urgent investigations. Police and MI5 carried out a full review of intelligence. There was a search of a flat in North London.
It feels like this attack came almost on cue at the end of a week where police have tried to allay public fears. It began with a when, not if warning, followed yesterday by a show of strength against the worst case scenario, a marauding terrorist attack. But last night's appears to be random, with just the simple weapon of a knife.
The murder scene was covered by a tent. It's the spot where an American woman in her 60s was killed, and close to where 5 others were injured. This cyclist, who asked us not to show his face, described how he tried to help.
The old lady that she was lying against the gates, and it was another 2 people. But suddenly the policemen arrived, they turned the lady back to give the first ID, and everybody started seeing more blood.
It was a man holding a knife, and around six people were attacked.
Was he saying anything? Was he shouting?
No, he was only running.
Armed police were on the scene within 6 minutes. Mobile phones captured the moment of the arrest. No shots were fired, only a taser. By lunchtime, the suspect was identified as a 19-year-old Norwegian Somali, Zakaria Bulhan, who's lived in the UK since the age of 5 and was on the radar of mental health services. No longer any connection to terrorism.
I emphasise that so far we have found no evidence of radicalisation that would suggest that the man in our custody is in any way motivated by terrorism. The suspect is a Norwegian national of Somali origin. I stress, though, that all the work we have done so far does not suggest that those factors in his background are relevant to the motivation for his actions.
The treatment of last night's attack is a sign of the times, the proximity of terrorism with mental health. Having raised a possible alarm, the authorities felt obliged to allay any public fears today by deploying more armed officers on the streets.
And the US media have tonight named the victim of that attack as Darlene Horton. She'd been in Britain with her husband, a Florida State University professor, on a summer study trip.
Well, a little earlier, I spoke to the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan. I asked him whether parading heavily armed officers before the press, as the Metropolitan Police did yesterday, just plays into a culture of fear.
Oh, look, I'm really pleased and proud that 92% of Met Police officers are unarmed. We police by consent. At the same time, we've got to learn the lessons from Nice, from Paris, from Brussels, from Istanbul, from Munich, and ensure that the police have a proportionate response to an attack on London. And you know, it's really important we recognise that it's a small number of officers who are armed, but they can respond quickly. So last night, for example, the officers had guns in their vehicles, but used a taser gun to subdue and disarm this man, which means he was able to be interviewed, his premises searched, and all the due diligence done today, which means we can say, thank God, that this person wasn't motivated by Daesh or things similar to that, and wasn't radicalised or an extremist.
But one former head of counter-terrorism said yesterday that it looked like a marketing ploy, promising something that just cannot be delivered, the promise of preventing terrorist attacks.
But I'm not sure that's right, because the Met Police Commissioner, with my support, this weekend said it's a question of when, not if. So nobody's promising that sometimes, you know, the bad guys won't be able to do bad things. That's why it's so important we are both calm and vigilant. Calm.
But what about the allegation that
terrorists...
yesterday did look like a marketing ploy?
Because calm, because what we can't allow to do is allow ourselves to be coward, stop and used in public transport, changing the way we live our lives. But vigilant, because the police rely upon our intelligence. We are their eyes and ears. And look, in less than 6 minutes, from a call being made to 999, the armed response team was on the scene at Russell Square last night. You know, there aren't many capital cities around the world who'd have armed response officers there in 6 minutes. But also, you know what? The armed response team didn't shoot to kill.
It seems that the mental health of the attacker was critical in this instance. What one thing are you going to do that will improve mental health services?
Well, firstly, we can't talk too much about this individual case, but there needs to be more joined-upness. One of my priorities as the Mayor, even though I'm not in charge of mental health, is to make sure we do a far better job in mental health. I'm in charge of public health and equality. I'm afraid too many rough sleepers are in London. A large number of them have mental health issues. A large number of those people in our prisons and YOIs, young offenders institutions, have mental health issues. The vast majority of people with mental health issues go about leading productive and healthy lives, have families, and do a really important contribution to our city.
Mr. Khan, I must ask you, in the last few moments we've heard Mr. Cameron's honours list has been published, a Companion of Honour for George Osborne, a knighthood for his head of communications. What do you make of it?
Well, as you'll appreciate, it's news to me. I've been busy doing things that are a bit more important than that, but, you know, I'll wait and see what the list says.
And we also understand that Shami Chakrabarti has received an honour. Mr. Corbyn had said we understood that she wasn't going to.
Look, I mean, I can't comment on things I don't know about.
OK, one thing you do know about, of course, is the Labour leadership. There are hustings today. Who will your vote go to?
What's really important is that we choose a leader who gives us the best chance to win the next general election.
And who is that, Mr. Khan?
I've said throughout, I'm not going to give a running commentary on the leadership contest. I want a constructive, positive, clean contest. At the end of it, we've got to choose a leader that gives us the best chance to win the next general election.
And you don't think your view would be valuable to other Labour members who are listening in, people who are voting in this election?
Well, I think we need to get back into the habit of winning general elections. We've lost the last two. We need to win the next one. I'm going to make sure, as the Mayor of London, I show not just London, but the rest of the country, the positive difference a Labour administration can make.
The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, talking to Jackie earlier. Some breaking news now, and the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, has just announced that Dame Lowell Goddard has resigned as head of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. I'm joined now by our senior Home Affairs correspondent, Simon Israel. Simon, has been disquiet about Justice Goddard amongst her team for quite some time, hasn't
There has. And this is another catastrophe to befall a public inquiry that was set up 2 years ago. She's the third chairperson to have had to quit because of controversy. This is about the time she has spent been working abroad, 70 days working abroad, while she's been paid to chair this public inquiry. And there have been a number of concerns that have gathered over the time about her ability to grasp the law and her powers under the Inquiries Act to force witnesses and everybody else to come forward and give evidence. And she was being challenged last week about whether the inquiry could go ahead on the Lord Janner case while Leicestershire Police are investigating it. And she really came across as not too very unsure about where she was. So today we've learnt, and the news is breaking so fast, so I have to go to the mobile phone for the Home Secretary's press release. But tonight, only just a few minutes ago, Amber Rudd issued this press release in which she said, "I want to assure everyone with an interest in the inquiry, particularly victims and survivors, that the work of the inquiry will continue without delay and a new chair will be appointed." Well, given the history of how difficult it has been to get a chair for this inquiry, who knows how much longer that might take.
Simon, thanks very much. Jackie.
Well, he's been described as the unacceptable face of capitalism. Sir Philip Green, former owner of the soon-to-be liquidated British Home Stores, has been locked in a row with MPs over his responsibilities to the 11,000 employees and 20,000 company pensioners. But most of the row has taken place at a safe distance as Sir Philip and his family spend their time on a £100 million yacht in the Aegean Sea. We sent our reporter Paul McNamara to try and get a word with him on behalf of his former workers.
It's Paul McNamara from Channel 4 News, and we're just calling again to request again an interview with Sir Philip Green.
For months we've been asking his office for an interview, to no avail. While MPs have savaged his handling of the BHS sell-off, Sir Philip has been holidaying on his super yacht, Lionheart.
We're more than happy to make it as easy as possible for him. You know, we'll go wherever he is.
Sir Philip didn't own BHS when it collapsed, but MPs still lay blame at his door for thousands of job losses and a £571 million black hole in the pension pot of 20,000 people. Judging by this video published to Twitter today, not everyone at home appreciates Sir Philip embarking on an adventure while this episode rolls on, heading from Malta to the Greek islands. One MP, Frank Field, used the time to criticise Sir Philip as Lionheart travelled first to Kalamata, then Spetsis and Skopelos. When it got to Skiathos last weekend, Sir Philip wrote to Frank Field saying he was turning a parliamentary inquiry into a kangaroo court. Sir Philip said,
"You should be in no doubt, Mr. Field, that any solution relies on a voluntary decision on our side to support the BHS pension schemes. Any failure to arrive at a pension solution will be down to you. The BHS pensioners can only hope that you now rein yourself in."
Was the billionaire businessman really threatening to jeopardise the financial future of thousands just because one MP annoyed him? We tracked him down to Mykonos to ask.
Forget everything you've heard about Greece over the last couple of years. Financial crisis, economic meltdown, none of that seems to apply here in Mykonos. What sort of people come to Mykonos?
It's rich people, it's royal, it's some businessman, it's...
And on the yachts?
More private for him.
More private, more pricey?
And more pricey.
And in this bay of super yachts, Sir Philip's was the biggest. Alas, we were only here for a couple of hours before Lionheart headed west to Poros. Warm waters, but a cold reception greeted us in Poros.
Hi there. Hi there. We're from Channel 4 News. Sorry to bother you. We were just wondering if Sir Philip would be willing to talk to us at all.
I'm afraid not.
I mean, you've come out all this way. Would you mind just asking him? I know, I completely appreciate that.
Thank you.
There's no chance of just asking him on our behalf? We'd just really like to talk to him about everything that's gone on, get his side. Hi there. No bud, no? Fair enough. Well, we'll take off now.
So despite coming all this way, Sir Philip still wasn't keen to talk, leaving thousands of BHS pensioners still not knowing if they can expect a future of plain sailing or freewheeling into the unknown.
Well, there's some breaking news tonight about that other political leadership contest, this time in the UK Independence Party. We return now to Michael Crick. Michael, what can you tell us?
Well, Channel 4 News learnt this afternoon, and it's been confirmed by the Gambling Commission, that they're carrying out an investigation into unusual betting patterns surrounding the UKIP leadership contest. And indeed, they've asked UKIP to carry out their own internal investigation as well. The Gambling Commission aren't saying much more about it, but I understand they also yesterday issued a warning to bookmakers about unusual betting patterns surrounding UKIP. This is very unusual, even across the gambling as a whole, let alone when it comes to political betting. Now, one allegation I've heard is that a senior individual in UKIP may have placed a large bet on Diane James sometime perhaps over the weekend. Now, what happened yesterday, you'll recall, is that Stephen Wolfe, who was the front runner, was blocked by the UKIP NEC, and Diane James immediately then became the favourite for the job. Indeed, her odds changed from 8 to 1, I think, on Paddy Power to 3 to 1 on. So if you put a bet on over the weekend, you'll be a very happy individual indeed.
We'll come back to you in a minute, Michael, but a little earlier I spoke to one of UKIP's biggest financial backers, Aaron Banks. I asked him why his favoured candidate for the leadership race, Stephen Wolfe, had not made it onto the ballot paper.
I think at the heart of it, there's a small clique of people within UKIP, within this NEC, that are basically making the rules up as they go along. It's pretty disgraceful.
Well, you've accused Neil Hamilton and Douglas Carswell of a coup to get Stephen Wolfe off the ballot paper. On this programme last night, Neil Hamilton, who's the UKIP leader in the Welsh Assembly, as you know, said that there was an uncivil war by a small number of people who had disappointed their favoured candidate, couldn't organise himself to get his nomination papers in on time. He's got a point, hasn't he?
Well, I think from Neil Hamilton's point of view, I think they are the small clique of people calling the shots, along with Douglas Carswell and a number of other people. As I said to you, they changed the rules to say you had to be a member 5 years, and it was 2 years. Then they try to exclude Stephen Wolfe for the technicality. I really think it's down to the membership of UKIP to decide the candidate they want, not a very small group of people.
So if Diane James becomes leader, would you still be prepared to give money to UKIP?
Well, I don't know what I'll do in the future. I mean, I was the largest individual donor to Brexit. I've given quite a lot of money to that cause. We won. I would love to see UKIP go ahead and do well, and I'd certainly consider it. Diane James is an excellent candidate.
But if not Diane James, would you like to see Nigel Farage back at the helm?
No, I think Nigel needs a rest. I mean, it's been his life work to achieve Brexit, and I think he's done brilliantly. And I think he cares about the party. I certainly think in terms of the constitutional reform, he's been pretty clear that changes need to happen. You know, for a lot of the time he was party leader, the same people on the NEC really were pretty unpleasant to him. And so...
But you can have a rest and then return to the fray. You're not ruling that out.
Well, you have to ask him. I'm not Nigel Farage. We're not married.
Yeah, I'm asking what you'd like, though, as a friend of his.
I certainly hope Nigel stays involved in politics, but I think I don't see it as party leader. I think in a different role, probably.
After the referendum, you said that reports of hate crimes inspired by the kind of rhetoric of the referendum were, quote, media hysteria and a whole load of rubbish. Actually, the official figures then proved that hate crime had risen considerably since the referendum. Would you like to apologise for those comments?
No, I certainly wouldn't. I'd like you to clarify what you mean. I mean, is it reported hate crime? Is it actual hate crime? And the numbers from what to what? I mean, they were relatively small numbers, and I'm not saying... I mean, it's
well, no, actually, just to give you some info on that, the official figures from police forces across England and Wales showed an increase in the first 2 weeks of July compared to the first 2 weeks of July last year, an increase of 20%. Something over 3,000 offences in those 2 weeks. Those are big numbers, and they're real numbers, aren't they?
No, but you know, the thing about it is you say they're real. If the media starts to talk about it, then the numbers go up, and that's the fact of the matter. I think it's wrong whenever it happens, whether before Brexit or after. It plays no part in our national life. But by the same token, we have to realise that the 52% of people that voted for Brexit weren't racist, they were interested in other things.
No, I'm not saying the 52% who voted for Brexit were racist. I'm not saying that at all, but I am saying that the hate crimes were not media hysteria, as you said.
No, I'm saying if you give prominent publicity to it, it probably encourages the sort of people that are inclined to do it anyway.
Aaron Banks from the funder of UKIP there. Back to Labour and tonight's first leadership hustings between Jeremy Corbyn and his challenger, Owen Smith. And, of course, it's back to Michael. Michael, how's it going so far?
Well, the bits of the debate that I've managed to watch, when I'm not talking about UKIP or the Honours, have been pretty lively, it has to be said. Jeremy Corbyn, in a way, is venturing into enemy territory in this, the first of the 9 debates that Labour are holding. I say enemy territory without being disparaging, but simply because Owen Smith's Pontypridd constituency is only about 10 miles from here. But the audience, I would say, if anything, is a bit more pro-Corbyn tonight, and certainly the biggest boos have been for Owen Smith. But it's been a very lively debate, as you would expect. Particularly, I think Owen Smith has been holding no punches in attacking Jeremy Corbyn, as he did earlier on when he made it clear that the Labour Party had to be a government in waiting, and this is how he went for Mr. Corbyn.
You want to put into practice our principles. You don't just want to protest about it, I hope. You want to actually deliver something for this country. And for me, that means winning. It doesn't mean trading our principles. It means winning to put them into practice. That's what we've got to do with a Labour government in waiting, not a protest movement.
And this is how the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, responded to that.
What I don't understand is how you can complain about disunity in the party when you and others are the ones who resigned from the shadow cabinet at the very point when we could have taken it to them.
Jeremy, I'm not having that, because you know, Jeremy, that I wasn't part of any coup in the Labour Party. Oh, no. I didn't resign from the shadow cabinet on that Sunday.
Well, there you are. You get a flavour of the atmosphere here tonight. And as I said, this is the first of 9 debates organised by the Labour Party, and there'll be other debates, no doubt, organised by other institutions. Just going back to the honours list story that we were talking about earlier, I ought to make it clear that Michael Fallon, he didn't get although I said he didn't get a knighthood, that's not quite right. He did get a knighthood. It's just a different type, a Knight of the Bath. I think is what he got, the Defence Secretary. Apologies for that.
Michael Crick, thanks for joining us. Earning you money today.
Multitasking, lots of different stories at once. After the break, Brexit and the farmers, a chance to break free of EU red tape or to make British farming a better friend of the environment. Welcome back. Now, one of the groups with perhaps the most to lose from Britain leaving the EU are the farmers, who until now have enjoyed £3.5 billion a year in subsidies from Europe. Didn't stop many of them voting for Brexit in the hope that the money would be replaced by government grants. Environmental subsidies have already suffered, though, and there are concerns over other payments. But Green groups say it's actually an opportunity to rethink what they call the broken system of subsidies altogether. In a moment, we'll be debating the issues, but first, this from our science editor, Tom Clark.
2 days a week on a boggy fen in Cambridgeshire, you can find Sir Jim Pace, former farming minister. No longer a political animal, he's got a bit more time to spend with his herd of Highland cattle.
Bjorn, they are set up just for you, that was.
Positive or negative, every farmer will give you a different take on Brexit. Sir Jim thinks farmers are in for a hard time.
Post-2020, I do not see the British government, or certainly the English government, to be more precise, sending a farmer effectively a cheque every year.
Here's the beef. Under the EU Common Agricultural Policy, British landowners get around £3.5 billion in subsidy a year, most of it linked to how many acres they own. Brexit campaigners argued we could maintain payments if we left Europe. Not likely, says Sir Jim.
Whether it's the NHS or education or anti-terrorism measures, all the extra border controls, they're all going to cost a huge sum of money, added to which the country's in deficit anyway. the direct payments, I'm quite convinced, will end. They may be a short term of a transition, but the long term, no, they've gone.
Already, there's a specific worry about farm subsidies that support nature conservation.
So what have we got in here?
This beautiful lilac flower, this is Phacelia. Now, not only is this good for building the fertility of the soil, what it's also wonderful for is providing something to eat for the bees and the butterflies. We've got barley and wheat in here, and this is the stuff that's going to provide seeds in the winter for the birds.
The RSPB champions the use of EU grants that pay farmers to support wildlife or improve water and soils.
So here at Hope Farm, we get about £5,000 a year to do this kind of activity, so put in this kind of management in the fields.
But these schemes run for 5 or 10 years, by which time we'll be out of the EU. And so far, a conspicuous silence from government about their future.
We're very concerned at the risks to this funding, because at the moment we have no commitment from the government on existing agreements or indeed the future, the medium and long-term future of this funding source. And that decision is currently with the Treasury, as we understand it. So yes, very concerned that you're going to get farmers who maybe don't bother to go into a scheme because they're unsure about how long it will last. And of course that will have impacts.
This field margin filled with wildflowers is paid for by European money. And what concerns environmentalists is that after Brexit, that money could dry up and farmers will switch back to growing things that make them more of a profit, like this barley. But long term, environmentalists see an opportunity from Brexit, the possibility for a radical rethink about how we reward farmers to protect nature. So while environment schemes look vulnerable right now, what campaigners want to see in future is a new subsidy system that rewards farmers not for how much land they manage, but for what they do to improve the environment for wildlife and people.
The market pays for food, but often the market doesn't pay for nature and wildlife and natural flood risk mitigation and delivering, helping to reduce our climate change emissions. So those kinds of greater public benefits need to be at the heart of any funding in the future.
So what do ordinary farmers make of that? Ian Waller, tenant farms 2,000 acres in Buckinghamshire and voted to leave.
By the time these lambs are having their own lambs, we might well have left the EU for good. Those farm payments that you and so many other farmers, let's face it, are reliant on will have gone. Yet you voted to leave. Help me understand.
European rules that have been applied to agriculture in the UK and certainly the environment in the UK haven't been exactly helping things.
Ian Waller is a first-generation farmer. He thinks the current subsidy system disproportionately benefits those who have land to the detriment of those who want to start out in farming.
This could really open up the agricultural market to young, new farmers coming into the business because they'll be hungrier to work harder. The older guys are just probably, they're past their retirement age, but they're just, the money's there, just we'll plod along and that's stopping young people coming into farming. I hope we can steer something that is really suitable for UK agriculture, that's actually fit for purpose, that works for everybody, whether they're halfway up a mountain in Cumbria or out on the fens.
Big landowners who profit most from the CAP might not like it, but out of the uncertainty of Brexit could come the shake-up of British farming that many feel it's needed for decades.
Tom Clark reporting there. Well, with me now is the Director General of the National Farmers Union, Terry Jones, and we're joined from Oxford by Dame Helen Ghosh, Director General of the National Trust. Dame Helen, can I begin with you? Coming out of Europe may cost farmers £2.5 billion a year in subsidies, yet you say it's an opportunity for them. What do you mean?
Well, we believe that the current subsidy system is broke. And Tom's film illustrated quite a lot of aspects of that. We don't mean we need to get to the new world overnight. What we do mean is that the taxpayer should pay subsidy for the things that the market can't provide. The subsidy system over the last 50 or 60 years has hammered nature. The birds, bees, butterflies, hedgerows that people love and that support a healthy and productive environment have been trashed. It hasn't worked for farmers either, because farmers are still going out of business and productivity levels are low. So what we think should happen is that subsidy should only go for those, as your second speaker was saying, public goods, to restore nature, to bring back that wildlife. And the market really should play its part, should step up, pay good prices for excellent food, pay farmers for the diversified things they can provide, and things like managing water in the uplands, which will prevent flooding and costs elsewhere.
Terry Jones, EU subsidies have basically been big cheques for big landowning farmers, and the environment has been hammered. It's not a pretty picture of farming, is it, in terms of what it's done to the
Common
environment?
agricultural policy has done a number of things over the years. It's been a policy which has helped to feed Europe, and it's helped farmers to deal with volatility. And I suppose Dame Helen's view of the countryside is, I'm afraid, a really outdated one. You know, what we've just heard there is a vision of the countryside from probably 40 or 50 years ago. Today we see farmers planting 30,000 kilometres of hedgerows, increasing the pollen mixtures for bees by 134%. What I can agree with her on, though, is that there is a real opportunity to change the system we have, to have a targeted system, to have a system that really delivers for the environment, but also for consumers and the economy. And this is really important, because the products that my members produce form the bedrock of the UK's largest industry, food and drink. It's £108 billion, 4 million jobs and 12 billion in export. And we must make sure that we have a policy that really incentivises competitive, exciting, dynamic agriculture for the future.
But do you accept that it is right that the link between how much land you own and how much subsidy you get should be broken, that it's been wrong, it's broken, as Dame Helen says?
We've got a fantastic opportunity.
Do you accept that or not?
No, there's a blank sheet of paper at the moment where we can build a really exciting, dynamic agriculture, and domestic farm policy will be part of this. But also we need the right trade policy. We need access to labour. There are a whole host of things. Look, it's been very clear that over time, farm support, whether you're in or out of Europe, is probably under threat. But what we need now is a policy that helps us to build competitive, resilient businesses for the future that can really deliver for the British people.
Dame Helen, what's your response to that?
Yeah. Well, there's so much that the NFU is saying with which we would completely agree. I don't think it's right to say I was talking about the past. Recent reports, State of Nature reports, show that nature continues to decline. The post-1990 environmental schemes that your second speaker was talking about on the film have done really little more than halt the decline. So what we need to do is to restore nature, to turn around those soils which have also been hammered and reduce the productivity.
Sorry to interrupt you, Dame Helen. Can I ask you
themselves?
Sorry to interrupt you, but can I ask you very quickly, is there a danger that if you push too hard down this route and a lot of farmers go out of business, that in the long run will be worse for the environment? Just briefly, if you would.
We're not proposing that we should go down this path at enormous speed. There are great farming examples across the country of farmers who are farming for nature, and we need to work with farmers, with business, with the food industry to make sure farmers can get a proper reward for their great products.
And Terry Jones, just really quickly, if you would, are you worried that actually the money you may lose from Europe you won't get back from government grants? Really quickly, I'm sorry.
This is a brand new world. Everything's up in the air. Of course we're concerned, and that's why we're out there at the moment consulting with our 47,000 members to try and build a really compelling vision for agriculture that delivers for the whole of the UK.
Dame Helen, Terry Jones, thank you so much. Cathy.
Thanks, Jackie. Tonight's main news. The Bank of England has cut interest rates to a record low of 0.25% and provided a multi-billion-pound boost to the economy in a bid to avert a recession. The announcement came as the bank warned of a big drop in growth forecasts and a rise in unemployment in the wake of the vote for Britain to leave the EU. That's all we've got time for tonight, but we'll be back tomorrow at 7. Until then, that's Channel 4 News. Good evening.